Yes, now, here is something that I've wanted to discuss for quite a while now, and it's a topic that my friend V brings up quite a lot, which is the male gaze. Now, I make it a habit of never watching V before I do videos. If I see him do something I plan on doing a video on, I'll avoid him. Don't want to be accused of swiping the man's content. Although the idea of a South African stealing from a gypsy mimetically is pretty funny. And one of my subs said to me, it's amazing how often V and I overlap, which is not a surprise, we're politically similar, though naturally, being a monarchist, I'm further right than him, and we roam in the same spheres online. Now, one thing that I've noticed where we diverge a little bit is we look at the same thing but come to different conclusions. V will often tell you what the academic toxin is designed to do, whereas I will make fun of it and tell you they're idiots and here's what it's actually doing. For example, the pushing the DEI bollocks into everything, recognized minorities are getting weaponized into poorly crafted political pawns, and everything that doesn't have minorities in it then seems to perform significantly better, and we end up assuming European supremacy is real through pattern recognition. Now, if I can shamelessly steal this picture from Vees' video where he shows Kotaku's headlines, and you can see the disparity. Anything that objectifies men is fine, but when it's women, they freak out. And as I've said a few times now, it looks ridiculous to live in a society where, on the one hand, feminism touts women are more than just their bodies, and yet when given the chance, women will sell their bodies and use feminism to call it empowering. Again, and then they wonder why no one takes them seriously. It also seems to make no freaking sense that we have a society that glorifies that, yet when it comes to seeing any female sensuality in entertainment that isn't designed exclusively to be sexual, it's shunned like a nunnery. Now, why is that? So here is something that I want everyone to think about. Learn the difference between critique and analysis. Critique is personal, very often used to render, say, a moral judgment, centered around concepts of guilt, hypocrisy, and shame, for example. Analysis, on the other hand, is trying to make sense of behavior patterns, and so for the purposes of that, use something that's more encompassing, a la action, reaction, and consequences, or rather lack thereof. Now, brace yourselves, people, because this video is about to go down a rabbit hole and I'm going to tie a whole bunch of things to this perspective. The first thing we have to recognize in order to make sense of all of this is, what does the regime want from you? Simple, to keep you atomized and buying. That's it. It is to keep you a mindless wage slave that consumes and nothing more. Eat, sleep, work, consume, and die. That is your life cycle, and that's all. To the regime, society is a factory farm, and as such, it will do everything in its power to keep men and women divided. Now, it goes without saying, this is not a natural way to live. From a purely mammalian perspective, by the way, our society is utterly at odds with basic biology, if that isn't glaringly obvious by now. It's basically really sick. Why do you think everyone is stoned and drunk constantly? Antidepressant use is at an all-time high among women. Can you guess why? And so here's why I said just a few moments ago you need to make the distinction between analysis and critique. So use OnlyFans girls as an example because they're easy, haha. If you were to critique their behavior, you'd only find what's wrong with their behavior from your own moral perspective, as well as the damage it does to society at large, so on and so forth. However, if you went to analyze their behavior from what I've said so far and go by action, reaction, and consequences, it makes far more sense. If the whole point of the regime is to keep men and women divided and consuming, well then naturally women turning themselves into factory workers that sell themselves, that's a win-win for the regime. The women are degrading their quality and virtue whilst making money. They maintain their so-called independence from a single man, a la a husband, both financially and also alienating themselves from the concept of being a wife by essentially becoming a form of scarred drug addict, because no worthy man wants to marry this kind of behavior. Once they pass their prime, the regime couldn't care less, they've served their purpose. And the regime will affirm this behavior as empowering, sex workers' real work, all of that nonsense, because it wants to keep men and women divided. It doesn't need to make logical sense from your moral perspective, it just needs to align with the goals of the regime. And as V points out, any femininity or concept of sensuality in entertainment is basically gone. Yet sex work is glorified. How the hell does that make any sense? Again, follow the goal and money. Women can make money from their bodies because that's empowering them. You, however, a man, can't make money from the female form because that's either A, exploitation at best, or B, robbing business from the sex worker at worst, which makes you an immoral agent in the eyes of the regime. Which brings us to the guys and the phenomenon of the simp. Now, The simping culture is actually quite strange in the sense that if you strip it bare bone, the underlying concept is actually fairly normal. It's resource allocation towards the opposite sex. Well, you do that when you seek a mate. You provide resources for your significant other, and they provide you with their body and company. Only this process was done with the larger goal in mind of forming a family and creating heirs, your duty to civilization in essence. That's how the species survives, how legacies are forged and maintained. Nowadays, though, we have this ridiculous thing of, oh, love who you want, all that cliched political rubbish, when in reality, no, if you had any sense at all, and you had some apex genes, you would find similar genetic stock of your own and breed to advance your group. But of course, people freak out and screech when you use that kind of language nowadays, which is absurd. You always want to find the best, the tallest, the strongest, the smartest, the successful, the beautiful. That's normal. Only this otherwise natural pattern has now been hijacked for consumerism purposes, which makes it incredibly damaging to the basic foundations of, frankly, any human civilization. There was a brief back and forth I saw between a guy and a girl on Twitter a while ago, and the guy simply ended it with saying, "Why would I pay for dinner when I can see you naked on OnlyFans for $7.99? Now, medically, that's a lethal singe, but as far as civilization goes, yeah, that's a soon-to-be nuked legion of red flags. But that's essentially the problem, the commodification of sex into this dystopian form. See, this is what makes consumerism and materialism extremely dangerous, and people like Adam and Stitch don't get this because they're idiots, but they operate on the Frederick Bastiat line: when goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. But they extend that principle as the main one that keeps a society in harmony to all human interactions in general, as if all potential troubles can simply be mitigated through material prosperity, which is obviously a ridiculous proposition. If materialism and consumerism is all that matters in your society, well then the concept of shame simply evaporates because it hampers profit maximization, and worse, your civilization getting replaced with a foreign horde is fine as long as they are on par with your GDP projection. Needless to say, that's insane and will desecrate and bring your society to ruins because we are not equal or equally capable. We are products of time and ancestors, not mendable pawns at the hands of politically obsessed psychopaths. The other reason is people who are hopelessly preoccupied with consumerism have no concept of legacy or low time preference. They are only concerned with the here and now, chasing momentary pleasures and no more. No ties to anything, which makes them not only susceptible to outside forces, but they are weakened because they have nothing to defend. Those who have families, who have legacies, businesses, things to call their own, are strengthened because they are driven to protect what they have forged, and in my opinion, it is far, far stronger when that is tied to the nation state. Do you see now why the regime doesn't like nationalism? It's because it's a defense mechanism. Now, as I've mentioned before, and Vees stated this as well, the art forms of the regime actually come off quite misogynistic because men can look amazing, but the women only subpar. And if your regime prohibits the exhibition of apex female form, well, it means you despise women. Any woman that naturally accentuates femininity is shunned because that's appealing to men. Well, they hate humanity in general, but the hatred looks more pronounced and focused on the females when it's destroying their form just to hurt men. And diversity is not a definition, people, it's a branding slogan. The product is simply anti-human indoctrination. And don't get it twisted though, the female audience at large do not like this direction either. In fact, Aiden showed me findings on female representation broken down by aggressiveness, attractiveness, role models, and gender role expectations. And a shock to no one, women are more appreciative of female beauty than men, and of traditional roles actually. So this whole gimmick of empowering women and the modern audience, that obviously doesn't exist. It's why it's overwhelmingly rejected. If Disney's deplorable year of tanking failures wasn't already a clear sign of that one. Now, as far as why do we see so many, let's just say unappealing XXs falling for this bollocks, particularly with the selfie inserts and all of that rubbish. I actually had a discussion with Scrump about it, and what I said before, that it's a mating strategy. Although in Scrump's words, it's a mutated one. Women do not want equality. That's politics. Nonsense politics at that. It's propaganda masquerading as politics. In fact, I'll even go one further and declare this. Any place where there's men and women don't have access to that, they don't want access for equality. No, they want dick. If it was about equality or empowerment or any of that rubbish, they would stay with their own. But that's not what they're really after. No, they want the opposite sex, plain and simple. Ask any guy this. Which sex behaves worse when they don't have the attention of the opposite sex? Overwhelmingly women. Men just get kind of mopey. Occasionally one goes off and goes kind of insane. But women sell themselves now, and that dynamic doesn't translate nearly as well for women because the market just isn't there. They crave affection in a way that men don't, and when they don't get it, they become rather aggressive and hostile to the point where it gets almost kind of creepy. Ask any guy who's had this experience. You can damn near be a sex addict, but when women are almost aggressively forward, there's something incredibly off-putting about it. I don't know why, it just gives off this weird vibe. Not quite clingy, not quite desperation, sort of a weird mutation of the two. And of course, with all this desexualization and emasculation, it leaves the door wide open for traditional men to lord the scenes. Women are not attracted to sensitivity and meekness. No, they want strength and domination. It is a man's job to lead and a woman's job to find a leader. Plain and simple. Hell, I think one of the main reasons why men think women are so difficult to understand is they try and make sense of their politics. They don't even understand their own freaking politics, so don't bother with that rubbish. That's a headache and a half. You want to know what makes a woman tick? Ignore all aspects of modernity and look at basic biology. Naturally, with a splash of Greek and Roman wisdom. Hell, it survived till now and it's still applicable. And with good reason. It's effective. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.